Hello, I'm Thomas Hare, Chief Content Officer of the Performance Driven Marketing Institute, a not for profit trade association that serves companies in the performance and direct consumer marketing world. Welcome to the second event in our winter seminar series created by the PDMI's Workshop Council titled Are Your Business Payments Safe? We welcome all of you to today's event, PDMI members and non members alike. Speaking of membership, if you're not a PDMI member but are attending today, we'd love to have you consider joining. During the past year, when we've lost 3 multi-day in-person conventions, there's no better way to support the mission of the PDMI than joining and sharing your voice in the direction of the industry. In the handouts tab of your control panel, you'll find our PDMI membership brochure. I urge you to download it, flip through it, and contact any of our team members should you desire more information. Before we get to today's conversation, I have another quick housekeeping note. The group will be addressing any questions from the audience at the end of today's session. You don't have to wait to ask them, however. Utilize the questions tab on your control panel to type and send your question in. We'll be collecting them and we'll try to get to as many as possible in the final moments of this webinar. Today, the Workshop Council welcomes a trio of leaders from the media and payment spaces in a session that was created by PDMI member company Paymerang. Our moderator today is Mike Johnson, Vice President of Business Development for Paymerang. He has more than 20 years experience in finance with an extensive background in the accounts receivable and accounts payable arenas. He's also a member of the PDMI Workshop Council. Joining Mike today are Jeff Gaynor, Director of Information Security and Risk Management at Paymerang, and Tammie Satchell, Accounts Payable Specialist at Lewis Media Partners in Richmond, Virginia. Thank you all for joining us. Mike, take it away.
Hey, everybody. First of all, thank you, Tom and John, for allowing us to talk to your group today. It's been fun being part of this this board, and I've definitely gotten a lot out of it, and we appreciate it. And then I'd like to also thank Jeff and Tammie for hopping on with us today and helping me present this information that we're about to discuss today. It's amazing how relevant it is to what's going on a day-to-day basis. I'm going to bring up some examples that have just come out over the last 48 hours as well. What I'd like to do is just jump right in and go to these slides. I'm going to talk briefly just to give you a little idea, and then Jeff, who's really our expert. I'm just the guy that can read. Jeff's the guy that knows all the information, so he's the one that's really going to present the meat of this today. And again, at the end of this, feel free to ask any questions. Jeff is extremely bright, and he knows a lot about what's going on in the marketplace today. So what I really want to start with is just what is happening with fraud today. Is it just an internal headache, or is it happening for everybody else? And I'm just going to jump right in, and if you want to go to the next slide, Jody, I want to give you a few examples. I'm sure many of you heard about the unemployment fraud that hit us. Unemployment system had close to, it was anywhere between 550 and actually $650 million worth of fraud that happened this year during the pandemic. The state recovered about 330 million of it right now. They're still trying to root out the fraud and try to figure out, what's going on. There were tens of thousands of out-of-work people in Washington that had their payments delayed because of this fraud scam that happened earlier in the year. So it's affected, I think, 1 in every 8 benefits that are paid out right now. The other one that we want to talk about was the COVID-19 scam, 5.6 million from victims. There were over 2,000 victims that lost money through fake goods that were sold online. It happens through cold calls, SMS messages, and other types of fraud. According to the UK agency Action on Fraud, which enables people to report if they're a victim of cybercrime or fraud. One type is a cold call that is reported to action fraud is for people who are claiming to help fix a device or an IT problem. And, I think it's a lot more common than people realize. A few years ago, before my father passed away, he had something that happened to his laptop. He called the number that said to call. He, paid them like $150. And 2 months later, my mom noticed on their credit card statement that they were getting this residual charge. And they called up and they said, oh, well, we have to keep doing this to help your computer. Well, at the end of the day, they had over, I think it was like $1,800 worth of charges to stop the malware that was going to his PC, and we had to call the credit card company and get it fixed for my dad. The computer was worth about $500, and he had $1,800 worth in charges trying to save the computer. And it happens to a lot of us, and it's very frustrating when that happens. The last example I want to give you right now is about the Chester postal worker. What happened there, according to prosecutors, is that Georgia stole checks from the post office in the county that she worked in. Her co-conspirators deposited the checks worth more than $75,000 into various bank accounts, and then turned around and withdrew the money, usually the same day before the checks were reported stolen. Very common experience for a lot of people. I pulled up two examples that aren't on the slides here that I wanted to bring up that I read yesterday. One was that people that have Macs, there were over 30,000 that found out this week that had been infected with a mysterious piece of malware. It is called the Silver Sparrow strain, and it has silently affected systems in more than 150 countries and around the world right now. It was discovered by researchers at a security company called Red Canary, who have yet to find out and determine what the purpose of that malware was for. And then the other example that I found this morning was, by the beginning of August, Reuters reported that U.S. losses with another type of coronavirus fraud has estimated $100 million in fraud and identity theft because of COVID. So it's happening every day. It's something that we need to look out for. And if you want to go to the next slide right now. So what we're seeing is, to combat the rise in payment fraud, nearly 60% of organizations have a fraud policy in place, and financial leaders at 80% of organizations right now are educating and training employees on what we call BEC, which is business email compromise, so that they can detect the fraud attacks that are going on currently. A couple more examples are, if you want to go to the next slide, Jody, is Zoom Corporation, which is an international money transfer organization. It's based out of California. They reported an incident where spoofed emails were sent to the company's finance department, which resulted in a transfer of $30.8 million in corporate cash to fraudulent overseas accounts. The CFO ended up resigning. The company's audit committee authorized an independent investigation by outside advisors. The company has implemented additional internal procedures, and the federal law enforcement authorities are actively pursuing a multi-agency criminal investigation because of and because of this, the stock has dropped about 14%, which is about $31 million so far. Example number two is Ubiquiti's Networks. They're a wireless networking technology out of San Jose, California. The company reported an attack targeting company finances that involved both employees and executive impersonations. The attack initiated by the company's subsidiaries out of Hong Kong, and it resulted in the transfer of $46.7 million in third-party bank accounts belonging to the attackers. Once they were alerted, the company recovered $8.2 million of that total amount transferred. Right now, it looks like they're going to get about another $6.8 million back sometime over the next year or so, and they're still trying to recover another $31.8 million. Right now, they are cooperating fully with the United States federal and overseas law enforcement agents trying to get that money back. And the last example I wanted to give to you before we switch it over to Jeff was that right now, Mattel, and most people know who Mattel is. They're a toy maker. The fraud was a result of a very sophisticated phishing attempt or actual phishing email that was directed at an unnamed finance executive who was able to approve large cash transfers. The email was apparently written by the new CEO, Christopher Sinclair. And I think Jeff's going to really get into it in here in a minute what to look out for. But I personally get emails like that all the time from our CEO. Which is really interesting that, I'd say at least twice a week I get an email from our CEO asking for my cell phone number, and it's interesting because we talk fairly often, so he already has my cell phone number. But this cyber attack conducted thorough research beforehand on all the senior management employees. As a result, it enabled them to understand the corporate hierarchy and the payment patterns that existed there. And because of the sophisticated nature of the cyber attack, they were able to to lure over $3 million from Mattel to the bank. And I'm going to pronounce this wrong. Wenzhou, China, I think is the name of the bank of Wenzhou, China, in China. Mattel contacted the FBI as well as the bank in China, and as a result, the funds were returned. What's interesting is that the bank also located in the Chinese region is infamous for funneling cash from stolen from CEO phishing scams. And because of this, Mattel did an investigation, and they tracked down over a dozen more scams that were launched at the company after that initial attack. I think we see it daily on the news. We're seeing it all the time. And hopefully Jeff is going to kind of go into, 4 different layers that we need to look out for. And I think that it's extremely important that, that we get something out of at least one piece of this. And Jeff, we appreciate you being on here today and speaking to this group. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So this next part of the agenda we're going to review is really the 4 layers of protection that is available for your payment ecosystem. Next slide, please. So in this case, there are 4 layers that provide a defense in depth approach to strengthening the entire payment ecosystem. These layers include safeguards that span the areas of people, process, and technology. Over the next 4 slides, we'll explore 16 safeguard areas across these 4 layers that can help you in your endeavors. Next slide. The first layer is at the point of payment. If the payment type you decide to make is check, then the positive pay service should be in place. Positive pay is, I've got a list of checks, here are my check numbers, here are my amounts. When a check comes in to be cleared against your account, it checks against that list, that positive pay list. In this case, while using the service, you want to make sure that you reconcile the exceptions that are found promptly to determine if they're fraudulent or not. Since checks are still considered the biggest fraud vector for payments, the movement from check to electronic payments using virtual cards or ACH payments has increased. The use of a virtual card, in this case, limits the exposure of a more traditional higher credit limit repeat use payment type card or a P card, purchase card you might have for your organization. With V cards, they're one-time use. They're loaded with the payment amount that's also backed by the issuer and the card network such as Visa. For ACH payments, the use of an established and governed payments network allows for a trusted mechanism to make electronic payments. While the use of the trusted network is a plus, there's also a level of operating rigor required to ensure that each payment's bank information is protected if stored. And finally, procedures are required to safeguard the payment in the form of payment change identity proofing. So in this case, the procedure ensures the requester of the payment change is an authorized party and not a fraudster attempting a vendor impersonation scheme. As well, limiting access to card and bank payment information and requiring one-over approval when redirecting payments or switching payment types are necessary. This is one of the most easiest ways to make sure that money isn't going to the wrong account is if someone calls up and says, oh, I have a new bank account. If it's a person you've never dealt with before, if it's an email address you've never dealt with before, question that, identity proof that, go to your authorized party that you have that relationship with that account, with that vendor account, and confirm with them. A lot of times, email is the way that that fraudsters love to operate in the shadows of email, the anonymity of email, and that's when it's in cases like this where you have to call them out from behind their email and make sure that you're dealing with the right parties on these such changes. Next slide, please. The second layer of protection is that of securing the payment operation. The office environment where payments are processed should include safeguards to keep sensitive information out of the open and destroyed when no longer needed. As well, if you're using checks, ensure that check stock is in a secured location when not in use. The individuals who operate the payment process need to be trained and aware of the threats that could impact their ability to continue payment processes. Understanding the cyber and social engineering threats that they could encounter is important. Business email compromise, as Mike described, that's a social engineering attack through email. Just calling up and asking about just asking for information, what they call pretexting, that's another social engineering tactic. Calling up and impersonating, that's another social engineering tactic. So those are being trained to understand how to spot for that is important. Next, being able to detect fraud actions through the payment process is a key safeguard to defending the payment ecosystem. This can come in the form of technical or operational red flag monitoring capabilities in this case to ensure that each payment makes it to the right owner and not to a fraudster. For example, the action that should have heightened a fraud red flag detection is a diverted or redirected payment request. Again, if they want to redirect a payment type, redirect where it's going, that should be an initial red flag for checking and confirming that it's authorized and it's true. Established procedures that are known and performed by all are critical to controlling the integrity of the process. Through the use of dual control approvals, in this case, payment limits allowed and role rotation, the payment operation can reduce the likelihood of payment errors, scams, and insider fraud or collusion. Handling sensitive data or account information needs to be secure in the environment. Everyone should become aware of and be trained on potential frauds and should always verify if in doubt. Training, training, training. Again, process and procedures need to be clearly stated and followed. Next slide. The third layer focuses on protecting the technical environment where payments are being processed. The first safeguard is to ensure a protected cleanroom environment is a protected PC. So you want to make sure that where you are processing the payments can be trusted, in this case, your PC, typically. Antivirus is a first line of defense or first line in achieving this by detecting and quarantining any possible malware that may have reached to the PC. PC application, what we call runtime control, acts as a second line of defense, enforcing that only allowed software can run on the PC. Both capabilities help to ensure the integrity of the processing environment and eliminate the chance that any malware can be installed that would look to acquire the payment information or accounting login information to payment or business bank accounts. When we talk about fraud, a way into getting to the end result of fraud is getting money to someone who's attempting to acquire it. In this case, that's the end game for them. Malware is a way to do that. If I can load malware on somebody's machine, I can scrape all that sensitive information off, and I can then reuse that outside of that, off that machine. If I get credit card, if I got login information, I can attempt to then log into someone else's account. Next, for payment processing, email is typically a necessary channel for communicating with payees. Being able to ensure the email that does make it to the inbox can be trusted with all malicious emails removed is important. This is especially needed in the case of email spear phishing attacks, known as business email compromise, as Mike described. Another protection to secure any payment information that needs to be communicated via email is the use of secure email communication. Email is considered not safe by default during transmission across the internet from mail server to mail server, and email can become more secure, able to send with sensitive information within it with the use of information protection capabilities, where email is held and then retrieved by the recipient across an encrypted connection instead of being transmitted in an unsafe, unencrypted manner across the internet. You may actually have run into this where someone sends you an email and all it really says is, hey, so-and-so has sent you an email. Here's a link, please go and retrieve this email. Again, it has to be from someone you've dealt with, someone you're expecting that email from. But what it ends up being is when you do access that link, you typically authenticate into this secure email capability. You'll see your email sitting there. You'll be able to read it, and if it does have an attachment to it, you'll be able to download that. Again, that's all through a browser, which is all encrypted, and that way that information will be held in protected way. So that's one way of doing that. On this next one, a vulnerability management program should be a requirement in all organizations, no matter if you disperse payments or not. This program exists to identify security weaknesses across the technology landscape of your organization, and then to implement remediating actions to strengthen the security profile of those technologies. Ultimately, this find and fix process is accomplished so that bad actors can't exploit these weaknesses and compromise your technology environment, including your sensitive and proprietary data. This goes back to, again, it's another way of getting into your environment, scraping your information, and reusing it somewhere else. A more mature program can start with conducting security scans and reviewing the security configurations and making modifications through their technology stack as required. They usually take the form of software patching is a typical remediation action for vulnerabilities, where a more secure version of software or deciding to strengthen a configuration of technology might be needed. Even if you're a small organization, where a full vulnerability management program may not be possible, the one action that should be performed always is keeping software updated to the latest version on your PC. So when Microsoft has or Apple has an OS, a Mac OS or an iOS upgrade, or Windows has a Windows 10 upgrade, make sure you take it, because that is, in most cases, there's some performance changes they're making to, there might be some bugs and some performance capabilities, but a lot of times it's also security bug fixes that they're fixing, and in those cases are security problems. So just make sure that you're running the latest versions of your software on your PC. Finally, threat detection is necessary across the network to understand if your organization is a target for a given threat. Being able to detect a possible intrusion within your network environment is critical to protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your network. The use of technology detection capabilities along with full logging at the appropriate levels will allow you to identify new and persistent threats and fraud within your network and your systems. Next page, next slide. The fourth layer is that of compliance oversight and audit assurance for the payment ecosystem, and is determined by the types of payments used. For those using the ACH network for direct electronic payments, it's NACHA that serves as the trustee of the network. The network requires careful development, administration, and rules to function, and NACHA helps with this. Using NACHA operating rules, those institutions that use the ACH network have a guide to keep the network effective. For participants in the network, as an oversight action, NACHA also requires an annual operating rules compliance audit. Another form of compliance safeguard that can be used is as an audit assurance function is that of the Service Organization Control Assessment, in this case, a SOC. This is where an audit expert is hired to review and attest that the 5 trust services criteria of security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy are handled within the organization's governance and control structure. Organizations want to be able to trust their service providers and with confidential information, and a clean SOC 2 report means they can depend on their service provider for secure, compliant service operation. The Payment Card Industry Security Standard Council, including Visa, MasterCard, JCB, Discover, and American Express, has required organizations that collect, process, or store credit card information to implement a set of security control standards to protect that information from falling into the wrong hands. The PCI Data Security Standard, also known as PCI DSS, details 12 security control areas that must be implemented into the payment card data environment. The PCI compliance rigor is based on the number of credit card transactions performed, with the highest transaction levels requiring an annual certification compliance audit with the 12 PCI DSS control areas completed by an audit expert. Also requires quarterly security scanning and annual penetration testing of the web application that handles card information. Finally, in the compliance realm for securing payments from fraud is that of the U.S. Treasury watch list check. The Office of Foreign Assets Control, or OFAC, manages a data set that lists those individuals and organizations that have been identified as threats to U.S. national interests. Payments are not to be dispersed to any party that is on the sanctioned list or in this data set. If a positive match is identified, then the payment is to be blocked and the OFAC is to be notified within 10 business days. In closing, with these 16 safeguard areas, you'll be better prepared to crush payment fraud risk in your payables program. Thank you, and back over to you, Mike.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I appreciate your time today. You know, what we're really hoping for today is, you know, what you guys take away is that this is a real threat. The statistic that I read recently is that 9 out of 10 of us sometime in the next year will have some sort of a fraud or security breach happen to us. You know, and if you're processing payments in-house, if you want to go to the next slide right now, Jody. You know, it's a good idea that if you can print this out, you know, or save it, you know, it's definitely a good reference tool. Some of the items listed may not pertain, but I'm confident there are some items on here that will pertain that should be addressed. I'd also like to point out, if you do not have the resources or internally some of the talent that you need, you know, it always makes sense, you know, that if you find a credible third party to reach out to, that can help you with this. You know, and I took some notes as Jeff was talking, and you know, some of the things that, you know, I talk about a lot with some of my potential customers is that, you know, even if you don't find a third party to do it, I think it's really important to do things like positive pay. You know, talk to your bank about it. It's not that expensive. It's simple for them to do. It's just an extra layer of protection, and it's well worth the money. You know, look out for things like bad spelling. You know, that is a sure sign. I know that you know, being on the council with John and these guys, you know, there's a lot of companies that are out there that are trying to sell you lists. And one of the things that you can always tell is that, you know, John isn't selling the list, it's some fraudulent company. And there's always bad spelling or something like that within there. I think, you know, really have a good set of procedures. You know, dual authentication, dual control is something that, you know, you really should be always looking at and trying to improve upon. And in my opinion, you know, I mean, updating your software is something that I typically don't pay attention to, but it's something that I'm taking away from this conversation, because just seeing that those 30,000 Mac users got infected with malware, and typically you think of Apple being more secure than a typical PC, but it's what's happening out there today. We appreciate your time, and I think Jody, are we going to have we're going to have some time for questions and answers, but also I think there is some time for was it Tammie to speak a little bit about her experience.
Hi, everyone. I am Tammie Satchell. I've been with Lewis Media for 5 years. We are a media marketing agency, and we're 23 years strong. We've been working with Paymerang for 9 years. They do all of our payments for us. I do all the payables here at the agency, and to know that my payments are safe when they leave my computer is it's amazing. We heard about Paymerang through our owner had brought it to the accounting department, and I'm kind of going through this because, again, I was here 5 years and we've had them for 9. So, at the beginning, there was a no-brainer. They're going to pay our bills and then pay us. So, it was a win-win for us, most definitely.
That we appreciate that, Tammie. And one thing that's interesting, I think, in this vertical in media is that there are a lot of vendors that are willing to accept electronic payments or want electronic payments, and they're definitely a more secure way to pay your bills. And we've had a lot of success in the media vertical with that. I'm real happy to say that we've got some great media clients. And, I think one of the things that we all need to look out for right now is that, and Jeff, you may be able to jump in and give us some better numbers, but I've seen some reports lately that we're getting 2 to 3 different attempts on a weekly basis for fraudulent vendors to submit fraudulent invoices that are coming from our clients, from our partners, that are telling us to pay these vendors. And we're able to do some research and go back to our partners and say, hey, listen, we don't feel that this is a valid invoice that you're wanting us to pay. And it's happening. It seems to me, and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to be happening more and more often on a weekly basis. Can you give us a little bit of insight of what we're seeing?
Yeah, so that's everything we've kind of described here. They call it the vendor impersonation scheme from a fraudster perspective. That is almost like the given nowadays. It happens quite frequently. From our perspective, we are always checking to ensure that the things we described that you can be doing as part of your program, what I just described through this conversation, is really what we're doing as well. So it's a matter of checking for the email address, making sure that who's requesting it is the person that you're expecting to be requested from. In some cases, it's hey, I used to be paid by check. Now I need to be paid by bank because of COVID. Oh, that's a flag right there. So it's really just really utilizing those capabilities, or those actions, taking those actions, those vigilant actions against these types of attacks. In this case, these fraudulent attempts that come at us. But yeah, it's happening on a weekly basis. It's happening in most cases. It's been happening across more so for we'll call it larger payments. and we'll say it's not just Paymerang, but across the industry. They're also seeing them with construction type payments, because those are typically larger payments. Sometimes they are I'll call it a series of payments, possibly the same amount. So if you're doing a large piece of capital funding for construction, that would definitely be one that you'd be wanting to watch for anything that you're interacting with there. As well, the other industry that we're starting to see more of this kind of action, or these types of actions against, is healthcare, more so in the we'll call it the senior vertical, or the senior industry for healthcare of seniors. And so that's where we've seen that, as well as out in the industry as well. So those are two definite areas right now that are hot for vendor impersonation fraud.
Absolutely. Tom, we'd like to open this up to any questions that that may have come up during this, and especially where we've got Jeff here. Have any questions come in that we can answer for anybody listening in today?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a few that have rolled in as we've gone along. You kind of touched on that. That's the first one right there. Kind of stole the thunder from it a little bit, but it's for the group. What's the biggest threat out there right now? And as business begins to return to a new normal across various industries, what threats might be on the horizon?
Jeff, do you want to start?
I'll say that so it's a little bit there. So vendor impersonation, that's a typical for this space, for the payable space, wanting to be a vendor impersonated company. That's definitely that's the biggest fraud threat that's out there right now. Coming back from the for a new normal, the threat, I think, now becomes those that are going to stay at home, because there's still, I think many companies have come to the conclusion that they can operate a part of their workforce from a remote perspective, making sure that those remote workers are kept up to date, kept communicated with, making sure that their technology is kept up to date as well, but to make sure that they're still kept in the loop on things, because sometimes when people, I'll call it out of sight, out of mind, hey, you're not in the office, you're working from home, and sometimes communications that might need to be had by everybody may not make it all the way through. And so that won't call it necessarily a hard threat, but that makes that's is much more of just an operational change that you'll want to make sure that you have in place, to make sure that everyone is aware, because as fraud is always occurring, and you want to make sure that everyone is as aware as possible for those latest things that might be coming at you. Even on that, something that happened in the morning, everyone needs to know about it. Something happened in the afternoon, everyone needs to know about it. So it's keeping those communication syncs or cadences going quicker and faster.
And Jeff, a couple things that I think, I found real interesting at the beginning of this whole pandemic was that, people didn't know what to do, in the sense, they were cutting checks. Now what do they do? And they were having employees taking check stock home with them, and they were cutting checks out of their own personal home, which is totally crazy to me. And part of that problem also is security. People are bringing home their laptops, and they're doing this from home, and they're not as secure at home because they're on somebody's Wi-Fi network or things like that. So as you mentioned earlier, I think what's going to happen is that a lot of companies aren't going to necessarily send their employees back to work right away. So they need to really have some good secure procedures in place so that their information is safeguarded. And I think we're seeing a lot of companies that really haven't thought that far outside the box. And I think that, my thing, I've talked about this for a while now, is that I don't believe that a lot of these large corporations are going to bring back 100% of the workforce in the office. They're seeing that they can work from home, they can be as efficient and a lot less expensive to have them at home with a PC at home than it is for them to have that, downtown New York office space. So I think as we grow into this new world, I think the security at home is going to be something that they're really going to have to start paying attention to.
Thanks, guys. Got one for Tammie here. Obviously, Paymerang is your provider, but what kind of service do you and your agency find most valuable when you think about a business payments partner?
The fact that we can send send a wire, send our money out, know that our vendors are going to be paid, and we don't have to worry about, are we going to have fraud? Is somebody going to, hack our accounts? We have, Paymerang to watch our back. So I think it's a huge win-win for us for Paymerang to be working with us. It's been a great partnership. I feel like they are constantly checking, constantly, asking questions. We've had several instances where, I'll send over an email that says, hey, we're, our ACH information is changing, and I'll get a bounce back or a call and be like, hey Tammie, we need to check this out. So I just feel like they, Paymerang has my back, and I don't have to worry.
That's great. I think that leads kind of into another question that came in for you, and that is, as the person at the end of this chain, what's the most common issue that you're facing when it comes to your business payments, and what's the most common thing, I guess, that you're taking to Paymerang as an issue?
I think some of the issues we've had, a lot of it, stemming from COVID, people being at home, or businesses, people not being in businesses. I think we've had, some checks come back, or some, information, having to be checked 2-3 times. I think a lot of it has to do with COVID, and, people not in the office setting anymore.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think it's, for all of us, if you look at the way it is when we do webinars like this, most people are at the home office still, not in the office just yet. And if they're in the office, they're maybe the only or one of a few people in the office. So I can understand, that conversation has happened a few times here across this webinar. So this one's for the group. If fraud happens at a corporate level, are there any studies that show how often the customer base might be at risk? And what, if any, are the industry standards or government regulations in place to protect the corporation's customer base?
So that one would be, if you think about FTC, that typically is a consumer layer protection from the client or customer of an organization's perspective. Obviously, it depends on the type of organization and what their customer, what the good or service is. But ultimately, there is federal regulation, federal capability that protects customers. And hoping I'm answering that kind of question, or taking that question in the right context, but it's typically through FTC capability.
All right, makes sense. Another question that came across about compliance, compliance being kind of the fourth area that was highlighted. The question is, it seems like it may be the most important. How can ensuring compliance across the board help you meet all of the other challenges that were discussed?
Yeah, so in some cases, the compliance need or the need for this type of audit assessment, in some cases are mandatory. Some cases it's, hey, if you, in Notch's case, if you want to do ACH business with us, you need to make sure that you're following our rules, and we'll have to have a third party assurance, or to ensure that you're following that. From the standpoint of like PCI, anytime you have a third party assessment, typically it's against a framework, some kind of, I'll call it either security control framework, some kind of set of governance and governance controls that you might be using within your organization. Obviously, from a finance perspective, Sarbanes-Oxley is a set of controls for financial controls for financial controllership. In this case, it's the same thing. You have a third party. They are they're grading you against these controls that you say that you have in place, because it says you're following the PCI DSS standard, or the data security standard. All right, let's take a look at these 12 controls or control areas and these 100 controls that are behind it. So in that case, you know, one, you've assessed against that. Two, it's a security framework. Although I will tell you, PCI DSS is kind of like, I'll call it a baseline, just enough table stakes to get in, to where they feel it's secure enough. And in the right areas, and so therefore it's really, those areas help reduce risk against this, in this case, sensitive card information getting into the wrong hands. So that's pretty much why compliance is required, is to you want to confirm that you are at least meeting best practices, meaning a baseline minimum of control sets that you would need.
Jeff, you know, I think one of the things that I've seen with working with a lot of clients is that they may have one piece of this or one piece of that, but they typically don't have everything, right? They typically, you know, they might be not checking the OFAC list. They might not have this, they might not have that. And working with a third party, typically, you know, companies like Paymerang, and there are a lot of other companies out there that do this, you know, typically we have to follow all the standards, and we're staying up to date on those. And that's one of the unique things about working with a third party, is that we're making sure that you're covered for everything that you need, you know, because, you know, ultimately, you know, if you, you know, pay the wrong vendor on that OFAC list, I mean, the fines are incredible. I mean, what does the fine start with OFAC? It's a few $100,000, isn't it? You know how much the fine is?
From an OFAC perspective, yeah,
Yeah.
it's. I thought it was. I don't think it's hundred thousands, but it does include jail time. So it's a fine and jail time.
Yeah, so it's significant, and you know, and I think the point being is that, you know, when you work with a third party, you know, we are going to make sure that you know, we're getting audited, we're getting checked on all these things, and we're making sure that you guys have the latest and greatest information out there as well.
Great, we got one more here, and probably for Mike, but obviously anyone else can chime in. If I decide to use an electronic business payments partner, what should my expectations be for starting that relationship, setup timeframes, et cetera?
You know, everybody's different. You know, that is one unique thing, you know, and I don't want this to be a sales pitch, but, you know, one unique thing about us is that, you know, typically we can get you up and running in just hours. Usually we say that, and what I mean by that is hours of your time. So it doesn't take long. The majority of work is on my team. They're the ones that are setting everything up. They're doing everything. Really, it's just a few hours of your time training you, showing you how it works, making sure we've got the right files coming through and things like that. one thing that is always tough for somebody like me is a lot of people have gone through these upgrades or these conversions in software in partners, and they've got a company coming in saying, "Oh, it's only going to take you a few weeks," and then 9 months later down the road, they're still implementing something. This is not that. This is simple. It's very easy. We do the majority of the heavy lifting. We just need to know who the vendors are, who you want us to pay. We're going to do some training. We're going to, the other thing is that it doesn't just stop at the once we get up and running. We always are calling our clients and going back and saying, "Hey, listen, we're finding these trends are happening, especially in fraud right now. We're seeing this. We want to make you aware of what we're seeing so that you know that." So to get up and running doesn't really take any of your time. It doesn't take any time. You're only uploading a file to us and sending us the funds, and then we're doing all the work. We're also following up on all your payment types as well, making sure that everything clears and things like that. But if it's something that you want to talk about, just feel free to get my information. It's on here. And I don't want to take up people's time today doing that. But it's a very simple process for you guys to get up and running.
All right, thanks. I'm going to pop back on here. We are good to wrap up. We'd like to thank everybody, our speakers, all three of you, Mike, Jeff, Tammie. Wonderful feedback and wonderful thoughts from all of you. I'd like to thank everybody for attending today. And we'd like to thank the Workshop Council for bringing us the event. If you're a PDMI member and would like to get involved, you can reach out to me directly to share your interest in the Workshop Council today. Your next opportunity to attend a PDMI live event online is our next episode of Take 20, which is our 20-minute webinar series created by the Brand Response Council, which will air live next Wednesday, March 3rd at 2 o'clock Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. Please visit thepdmi.com/take-20 to check out the upcoming schedule and register to attend. In addition, our upcoming 2-day live webinar extravaganza, PDMI East Virtual, is slated for March 9th and 10th. For more information and to register, there are 8 different 1-hour sessions scheduled over those 2 days, with a possible bonus day being added. Conversations ongoing, so keep an eye on your email for that, and visit thepdmi.com/pdmi-east now. Finally, the next seasonal seminar series event, the first in our spring seminar series, will take place in April with speakers announced soon. Keep an eye on your email, our website, and social media for more info and your chance to register. Thanks again for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your day and your work week. Stay safe, stay well. Take care. Bye-bye.